Wishworld is the first part of Doctor Who Season 2's finale, but does it set up the final episode well, or is there too much going on? So obviously the first part of the Doctor Who Season 2 finale, Wishworld, aired last week. Now this video may be more of a first impressions video than a review, we'll see how it goes, as obviously a lot of this episode depends on the following episode, The Reality War, airing, and seeing how most of this is paid off in that episode, much like it was last year with The Legend of Ruby Sunday. So because of that, this video might not be as long as my previous reviews, but we'll see. So with all that being said, does this episode set up too much, and is it better than last year's The Legend of Ruby Sunday? Before we get into that review, I just want to mention, in celebration of Doctor Who Season 2 airing, I currently have a discount on my Patreon for 50% off your first month of any paid tier on my Patreon page when you use code SEASON2. So I'll make sure to have the Patreon linked in the description down below, but that's just a little discount I'm running in celebration of Doctor Who Season 2. And without further ado, let's get back into the review. So to begin with, for this cold open, I was initially confused seeing the Rani using magic at the start of this episode, given that she's meant to be a scientist, but I do think this is explained well later on in the episode with the baby being the god of wishes, and that's how the Rani is getting her magical abilities, because this baby is the 7th son of the 7th son of the 7th son, which is obviously 777, which is a lucky number, and means that this baby is apparently Desiderium, the god of wishes, so another member of the Pantheon. And in this cold opening as well, we do get a fun ending to the cold open with the Doctor, or John Smith, and Belinda waking up as a married couple with a daughter, which is a nice lead-in to the titles of this episode. Obviously, along with Conrad appearing on the TV screen and returning from Lucky Day. I think it's a lot of fun having this episode take place in this alternate reality, Conrad's wish world, and it leads to a lot of the episode feeling very inspired by things like WandaVision, and even Barbie, mostly with the cold open with John Smith and Belinda waking up, but that could also just be because Ncuti Gatwa is in this. And there's obviously a lot of kind of similar things to 1984 in this as well, by George Orwell. Obviously, this reality that Conrad has wished into existence is very inspired by the kind of 1950s nuclear family type vibe, which we see with a lot of the characters and what they're doing in their day-to-day life, and even some of the set design and visuals in this episode. We've obviously got the Doctor, or John Smith, and his wife Belinda, and their one child, with John Smith being the one to go out to work and Belinda staying at home and looking after the child and the house, which obviously fits the traditional kind of 1950s family and the nuclear family dynamic, which obviously is something that Conrad is going to want to be a thing, or believes is the right thing to be. I guess this isn't technically a proper nuclear family with John Smith and Belinda only having one child. The traditional nuclear family is usually like a husband and wife and a daughter and a son, but if I want to dust off some of my sociology degree, Murdoch 1949 describes the family as a social group characterized by common residence, economic cooperation and reproduction. It includes adults of both sexes, at least 2 of whom maintain a socially approved sexual relationship, and 1 or more children, owned or adopted, of the sexually cohabiting adults, which is obviously what this episode is trying to go for and what Conrad believes is right, and definitely matches Conrad's views in Lucky Day. And I particularly like the moment in Unit where the Doctor, or John Smith, calls Ibrahim a beautiful man, and that obviously leads to Ibrahim having some issues with that and saying that you can't find another man beautiful, because this is obviously that 1950s stereotypical dynamic where homosexuality isn't really accepted. I think the slips are also a fun detail to show how important doubt is in this story and how there's something wrong with this reality. And similarly, we also have the Bone Beast, which are a very interesting visual in this episode, even if they aren't really doing anything and we don't really know why they're here, besides maybe to encourage doubt, as obviously that's what they actually want in the end. However, Russell T Davies has stated that they will be explained in the next episode. But personally, this is probably my main issue with this episode, is I just wish we had more time with this fake reality world. Instead of cutting back to the Rani, Mrs. Flood and Conrad in the Bone Palace, I kind of wish we were just kind of dropped into this fake reality with the Doctor, or John Smith, and Belinda at the start of this episode, and we were kind of left trying to figure it out all throughout the episode until it gets revealed at the end. But obviously instead we have the cold open with the Rani, which kind of explains roughly what's going on, and we keep cutting back to the Rani and Mrs. Flood and Conrad in the Bone Palace, which gives us more of an explanation as to what is going on instead of just finding out alongside the main characters in this episode. And it also just means means we don't get to see as much of this fake reality as I would have loved to see in this episode. Obviously, another big part of this episode is the dispossessed, which are the people that Conrad doesn't really think about, and so they don't really exist in his reality. They can kind of do whatever they want because he isn't really thinking about them. This is something that I actually knew was going to be in the episode before it aired, as obviously some of you may know Tharies appeared in this scene as an extra, and I actually edited his video talking about this episode and appearing on the show, which we did before the episode actually aired so that it could be ready on time. So this is something I actually knew about the episode, but it still was a great detail and really shows a flaw in Conrad's wish world, as people he doesn't think about are forgotten and able to tell that something is wrong with this reality and are trying to do something about it. And of course, this is also very well set up in Lucky Day with his comments about Shirley that he makes in that episode. We also have the two Ranis, with Archie Panjabi as the new Rani, who I think is great in this episode. She's really channeling Kate O'Mara with her campness, and I'm glad they actually get around to showing her being a scientist and doing experiments in this episode, with her whole plan being a science experiment to break apart reality and reveal the Underverse, instead of just having her be a female version of the Master, basically, even if she does do some similar things in this episode, such as the dance sequence. And I think having the dynamic of both the Rani and Mrs. Flood is a fun one, but I'd be interested to see what they do with this in the next episode, and if they justify having another bi-generation so soon after it was first introduced, which apparently we are going to get an explanation about bi-generation next episode, if RTD is telling the truth. Okay, so towards the end of this episode, we get a green screen cameo from Rogue, which doesn't look all that great, but it is nice to see Rogue again and have some kind of follow-up from the episode Rogue last season. Unfortunately, I don't think we're really going to get more than we got here, unless 15 does continue into the next season and we get an episode of him trying to save him, but I don't know how likely that will be. It does also feel a little bit weird that Rogue knows all this stuff and is able to communicate to the Doctor in this fake reality, but it was still nice to see him, bad visual effects aside. And obviously, Rogue tells the Doctor that tables don't do that, referring to the slips in this episode, which leads to the Doctor, or I guess John Smith in this case, having doubts about this reality, leading to Belinda calling the police on him and getting him taken away to the Bone Palace, where we then get the Rani reveal to the Doctor or John Smith and Belinda, which obviously is unfortunate because we already knew this because of the disappointing and underwhelming post-credit scene reveal last episode. But even if not for that, the Doctor is still John Smith at this point, and Belinda isn't herself at this point either, so we're still not really getting it revealed to the Doctor, even if he does come to towards the end of the episode and know about this. But I guess they didn't care as much about this Rani reveal, because obviously the big part of this episode and the big cliffhanger for this particular episode is the return of Omega, as the Rani is trying to break apart reality to reveal the Underverse where Omega is apparently hidden. Now, it's interesting that we didn't see Omega at the end of this episode like we did with Sutekh in the cliffhanger for The Legend of Ruby Sunday. I think that would have been a much more impactful moment to end the episode on. Instead, we just get some archived dialogue from Omega from, I think, a Big Finish audio as far as I know. But I'm assuming they're doing this for a reason. There's probably a reason they couldn't show Omega at the end of this episode because of what happened next episode. For example, maybe next episode will focus on them trying to prevent his return instead of him actually returning and them trying to banish him again. But that's just some speculation on my end. I do think it would have been more impactful if we did end it on a reveal of Omega himself. But as cool as it is to see Omega finally returning, this reveal does have me a little bit worried for the next episode, as it's already kind of overcrowded as it is with two Ranis and Conrad, and now we're adding Omega into the mix. And obviously as well, there's also the expected return of Susan next episode as well, with her showing up for the past couple of episodes. So I just think it's going to be a bit of an overcrowded finale, and I am worried about that. Speaking of Susan, this episode ends with the Doctor saying that Poppy is real, which is an interesting way to end the episode and is obviously going to have some significance next episode. Obviously, if you think about it, nobody in this episode has been created from thin air for this reality. There's no made up people that didn't exist before this wish world, which does mean that Poppy is likely a real person that's been put into this wish world. And with such a strong emphasis on this at the end of the episode, there is of course speculation that this could have something to do with Susan, and that Poppy is somehow the Doctor's real daughter and is maybe Susan's mother. But let me know what you think about that theory in the comments down below. So overall, I think I mostly enjoyed this episode, but it is setting up a lot for next episode as we already have 2 Ronnies and Conrads, and now we're getting Omega and potentially Susan. Similar to The Legend of Ruby Sunday last year, this episode mostly exists to set up the final episode. However, I just don't think this feels as exciting of a build-up as that episode was, as there's not much of an escalation or anticipation in this episode as there was with the build-up to Sutek last year, even if Empire of Death wasn't the best resolution to that, especially given that we don't see Omega at the end of this episode like we did with Sutek at the end of The Legend of Ruby Sunday. With that being said, although this episode is mostly build-up, similar to The Legend of Ruby Sunday, this episode actually does stand a lot better on its own when compared to that episode, as that episode was purely set up for the Empire of Death with not a lot actually happening on its own in the episode, whereas this episode actually does something interesting with the whole alternate reality of Conrad's wish world, the social commentary on traditional 1950s values, and those who are forgotten in society, along with its 1984 similarities. But like I said, it's setting up a lot for the final episode, especially with bringing Omega back, so I'm cautious as to how well they are going to pay this off, especially after Empire of Death last year. But with that being said, the reality war is going to be a bit of a longer episode at over an hour long, so there's a chance that they are able to wrap it up without it feeling rushed. However, that extra time could just be for a surprise open-ended regeneration for the 15th Doctor. But let me know what you thought about this episode in the comments down below. And before this video ends, I'd just like to give a shout out to my patrons JB, Tom Baker, Lewis, Andy Collin, flippredd, theunquest, James Box, Oliver Underwood, TheBeastBoss, and LukeN.B.N. These are all free members who, along with getting their names read out here, also get some behind the scenes updates such as thumbnail previews and a free monthly newsletter. To get your name read out at the start of videos, as well as getting early access to videos and exclusive content, you can join as a paid member. And in celebration of Doctor Who Season 2, I'm currently running a 50% discount off your first month on any tier if you use code Season2. I'll make sure to have my Patreon linked in the description down below, so subscribe to the channel and thanks for watching.